Good morning and good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today, Connecting Your Business with Dynamics 365 Financials. This will be a panel discussion and be moderated by Andrew Good, which is me. So we will get underway. We will make a recording of this session and have that available afterwards if you wish to go back and review. And a couple of orders of operations. We will collect questions as we're going through the discussion, and then we will address those questions as we move through the panelist discussion portion of the presentation today. I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have Mark Brummel from NAV Skills, and as you can gather, a NAV MVP and NAV background. We have Belinda Allen, who is a GP MVP and will provide her perspective as we move through. We have Peak as well. His background is C5 and economics as well as NAV and understanding functional aspects of the ERP system. And also James Crowder. James Crowder is a NAV MVP and also is the managing director of his firm. So he has a slightly different perspective on the whole business opportunities surrounding Dynamics 365. So today what we wanted to do and want to be clear is that we wanted to give you some context about whether or not Dynamics 365 is a solution that makes sense for you to consider pursuing as a line of business. And to provide that context, we're going to provide you with an overview of Dynamics 365 Financials, and then we'll have a panel discussion afterwards. So as we're going through, if you do have questions, please enter those questions into the question box so that we can gather those up and address them during our panel discussion. We'll now step into the demo, and as we go through the demo, we are going to have a look at assisted setup, focusing on the ease of use of Dynamics 365 and the fact that there are a number of very familiar tools that are available to work with, and also the user experience. So we'll step into the demo, and then once we've completed that, we'll come back out. We'll introduce the panel and step into a panel discussion. So we'll walk through Dynamics 365, and as we walk through this, we're going to look at the assisted setup. We are starting out in a demo company, currently Cronus US, but I do want to show you and introduce you to the assisted setup and activities related to assisted setup. So up on my ribbon, I have an assisted setup, and you can notice now I also have tooltips that become available as I move to select a button. Some of my assisted setup at this time has been completed, some of it has not. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at an example of what happens when I select an activity that is completed versus one that's not. So I can click Setup, Start Setup, and you'll notice I very quickly get a message confirming, asking me to confirm whether or not I want to run the setup again. So at this point, I'm going to say no. I'm happy with the setup I have, but I will now go down into the area called Reporting, and with Reporting, I can actually expose my ERP data to an external tool so that we can go ahead and we can connect other tools using OData to our Dynamics 365 instance. Very straightforward process. So as you can see, I'm being guided in terms of what do I need to do, what do I want to do. I want to go ahead and create a copy of an existing data set or edit an existing data set. So I want to create a new data set. So I'm going to create my new data set. I'm going to give it a name. And we're going to do a demo of the item. And I'm going to use a page as my source. Down here, if I happen to know my object ID, I can work with that. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I'm going to select my item list because I'm interested in getting...
Andrew. We're not seeing...
Andrew, I don't see anything.
It looks like the screen is frozen. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. What we'll do is I'm just going to back up a couple of steps then so that everyone can see where I am. So through my assisted setup, I'm going to go in and set up reporting. I get prompted with the fact that I've already done some setup in this area and I do wish to proceed, so I'm going to move forward. I get a dialog explaining what this is about and how I can use it. I'm going to go ahead and proceed to create a new data set. I'm going to give my data set a name. I'm just going to call it demo item. And I'm going to base that on my item list. I'm going to proceed. And what I'm able to do now with my data set is, in addition to having all the fields available that were on my item list page, I can go through and identify whether or not I'm interested in carrying certain fields through to my OData. I'm going to take my assembly BOM out because at this point I'm not using this information. And I'm happy with my results. You'll notice I don't have a next button, but I do have the ability to add filters and publish. If I wish to expose an OData service and I only want it to be purchased items or items in the 1,000 range, I can apply filters. I'm going to go ahead and publish this. As I publish this, a URL is generated, and it's a very long URL, but this allows me then to use that URL with an external tool to access the data that's directly in my instance. And that's all there is to setting up an OData web stream. So very straightforward to expose your data in a controlled and authenticated way that you can consume in another application. We can go ahead as we're working through our system and we can look at items. As we're looking at items, this is great. I've got a lot of good item information. I can work with my items either in a gallery view or a list view that some people may be more familiar with, or alternately I can look at it in a reduced gallery view. Nonetheless, I can go through and I can edit this my item information in Excel. So I'm going to click on Edit in Excel. I get prompted to go ahead and open up my Excel sheet. And in just one moment, I will bring my Excel sheet over to the main screen. We're going to go through and verify the connection. Excel is refreshing the data. And this is working with the instance that we've set up. And now I have information available in Excel that I can review, I can edit, and I can publish back to NAV. So very quickly I can get to the data. I can use a very familiar tool such as Excel to work with my data. let's go ahead and create an order for a customer. So I'm on my customer list. I'm going to go ahead. The Canon Group does want to buy something from us today, and what we need to do is go ahead and create a sales order. Since Dynamics 365 knows who the customer is, I can simply move down to my line and I can proceed to enter my order. And I'm interested in an Amsterdam lamp. And so I've just started typing in the description because I remember what it was called. Equally well, I could have typed in an item number, confirm my quantity, and here I can then proceed to record my sale, shipment, and invoice for this particular customer and complete my transaction. So I'm going to go ahead and post or record my transaction. But prior to doing that, I can actually email out my confirmation. And I want to actually get confirmation that I've entered it correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and generate an email. It's going to go to me, and it's going to contain the order details. So I'm going to send that email. I'm going to move off screen just for a moment. Confirm the receipt of that email. Here's the email that I've received. You'll notice the timestamp is 10:12 Eastern Time. And attached is, in the body, is my order confirmation as well as a PDF document. And I didn't have to do any setup in the system. So I've got my order confirmation. Yes, I'm happy with this order. And now I've got confirmation from my customer. I can go ahead and record my transaction. I'm going to ship and invoice. So this is going to take my item out of inventory, at the same time generate an invoice, and I get a confirmation, do I want to go ahead and see my posted invoice? And yes, in fact I do, because there's just one last thing that I need to do in terms of notifying my customers, is I need to send my invoice by email. I'm going to go ahead and now send my invoice. I've completed my transaction. The invoice has been delivered. The goods have been shipped. And I can save a copy of that to disk as well if I wish to. So very quickly, we've seen how we can come into the Dynamics 365 environment. We can walk through assisted setup. We can work with tools that we're familiar with in the system in terms of Excel. The user experience is laid out very easy to understand what the tasks are, and with the Hover Help we can see an explanation of the various activities and quickly get at our data that we're working with. You'll notice that we have a message about our trial period that I've just cleared. Throughout the dashboard or my home screen, I also have additional information telling me about the status of my business and allowing me to quickly go in and add transactions directly from my primary role center. And just as we wrap up, I will bring up a list of the assisted setup tasks one last time. And you can see that this is laid out in a logical manner so that I can go ahead and I can migrate my business data. And there are some migration apps available in the App Source to pull your data in from other systems and sources, in addition to being able to use what we call rapid start tools. So this wraps up the overview of Dynamics 365. Very straightforward and easy to use. In addition to having these three primary areas, we also have our additional functional areas where you can go through and complete other activities. I've scratched the surface in terms of features and functions, And as we move through the panel discussion, we can highlight some of the similarities and differences with the NAV, GP, C5 economics products. So we're now going to move on to our panel discussion. If you do have questions, please add them into the discussion box, the question box, so that we can include those in our panel discussion. So I would like to open up the floor to questions and introduce our panel. Very quickly, panelists, if you could each in turn introduce yourself, and then we'll move into the questions. Mark, if we could start with you, please.
Sure. My name is Mark Rongel. I'm from the Netherlands. And I've been working with NAV for about 20 years, and I'm happy to take part of this webinar today and answer questions.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Belinda, would you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Belinda Allen, and I am a GP person. And I'm with Ingevity out of Denver, Colorado. We do a lot of hosting of GP. I, however, am located on the East Coast, and I'm the old person on the crew today. This month marks 26 years working with GP.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you very much, I think.
James, would you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, so I'm James Crowder. I'm out of the UK. I have the privilege of working in a partner in the UK called Technology Management. I feel quite young now, thanks Belinda. I've only got 21 years worth of experience with NAV, primarily as a consultant.
You're quite welcome, James.
Okay, and Peek, if you could introduce yourself as well, please.
I can do that. Hello, everybody. My name is Pike Beck Andersen, and I am situated in Denmark and have been working with NAV since 1984. And I'm not very good at math, but I think I am topping Belinda. So I've been working with all the versions from the original PC Plus up to the present NAV, and I was involved in the C5 upgrade process when they went from C5 to NAV. So working with both the application side, the installation, and the development. So I'm a bit of a dinosaur, as they call me here.
So as you can see, we have a variety of perspectives that we can bring to the table. So what we're going to do is walk through, have a look at some questions that have been asked of as we've gone through this morning, and let's start with a question of, well, one of the questions is a technical question around, you know, the mechanics of becoming a CSP, a cloud service provider, from an NAV perspective, or a Microsoft perspective, I should say. So what's required to become a CSP? Who would like to take that question?
I'll take that one, if James, if you like.
All right, James.
So CSP is primarily Microsoft's new licensing model for all their online services. Really, the criteria for becoming a CSP partner is pretty loose. Anybody can become a Tier 2 CSP partner. which allows you to resell these services. There is no technical criteria about signing you up as a Tier 2 partner. Tier 2 means that you don't buy direct from Microsoft, you buy via a distributor, of which there are lots out there. So all of the traditional ones like Ingram and those boys, you don't have to go via any specific Dynamics channel to do this. Tier 1 means that you do interact with Microsoft directly, and you have to be invited by Microsoft to be a Tier 1 partner. There's quite a lot of technical interfacing to their systems that you have to complete. I know to my cost, having just completed that task to get to be Tier 1. So the majority of people, I think, will opt for Tier 2 just because it's a lot less hassle to complete with that. It is a monthly process, so it's a monthly subscription. You can subscribe on CSP licenses, believe it or not, down to the hour if you really want to, but typically it's by day or by month and by users. And Microsoft update their systems immediately, so it appears in, for instance, the Office 365 admin portal. You can enable whichever license SKUs you've added. So quite simple, straightforward process. Most of the distributors now have got management portals that you can update online pretty simply and easily. So getting up and going with something like Dynamics 365 Financials in the geographies that it's available can be a 5-minute process.
Thank you. You have also introduced the next question, which has to do with, do we know release dates beyond Canada and the US for Dynamics 365 at this point in time? Would somebody like to take that question, or I can take it? Okay, this is Andrew. I'll take the question. At this point in time, we don't have the release information nor final confirmation of the next release countries. I would expect that that information will be coming over the next few months. I don't know exactly when. They had said 2017, so that gives them another 11 months to decide. I think it will be earlier rather than later that they'll make the announcement. Okay, I have a general question for all the panelists. How many of you have switched your email over to Office 365? And how has the elimination of Exchange affected your business? Belinda, can we start with you?
Yep, I am a huge fan of Office 365. I migrated very quickly. I did so prior to last spring when I had my own partnership. We merged with Ingevity last spring. They also, I'm happy to say, are a huge advocate of Office 365. It eliminates a giant headache getting rid of Exchange Server, and you get so much more out of it. I'm a big Power BI person, and the benefits that are derived in Power BI with Office 365 are just so absolutely worth it. So I know I'm sounding like a commercial rather than getting some specifics to your question, but I honestly feel like any headache that we resolved or that we had during the migration process was immediately relieved shortly thereafter with the benefit of using Office 365. Yeah, big fan.
Pike, have you switched to Office 365?
I haven't myself because my company is very limited, but I have a lot of customers that have switched. and they have the same experience as Belinda. At just getting rid of the Exchange server, that was worthwhile.
Just to continue on, like one huge benefit for I didn't explain some of the detail on Power BI, but and I'm assuming that some of this is going to carry over into Dynamics 365 to try to stay on topic. But the putting data out, for example, on OneDrive for Business, and I am an advocate. I prefer OneDrive Personal over OneDrive for Business, but one advantage is if you put data out on OneDrive for Business, Power BI will automatically refresh off that data every hour without any user intervention at all. So that is just like one tiny, tiny little aspect. Power BI also takes advantage of using the groups that you set up in Office 365, Office 365. So those are just a couple of things that totally make it worth it.
James or Mark, would either of you like to make any comments about Office 365?
So I'll probably say I can't remember not being on Office 365 now. It's 3 or 4, 5 years ago, and it's just normal over here. In terms of losing the Exchange servers, you know, I don't think we've missed that for a second. It enables us to stop spending time checking that particular services are running or whatever. You know, even from a solution architecture point of view, all of the APIs that sometimes we use to update, you know, appointments within the calendars or whatever are still available within Office 365. My personal love of one, if I had to pick out one aspect that I really like, it's single sign-on. So, you know, having one single sign-on across not just my NAV systems or my D365 financials, but my Outlook, my OneDrive, my Power BI, when I'm accessing that app on my phone to pull up the latest Power BI report that I want to look at, I don't have to scramble around trying to remember what I set the username and password to this time. So that's just made my life a lot simpler and a lot more straightforward, and I don't regret the move for a second.
I totally agree with you, James. That single sign-on is quite the big deal.
So that question was asked as a leading question because that's, for many people, one of our first frames of reference of a SaaS solution offered by Microsoft, end-to-end, taking something that had each business or organization had to deal with, which was email and email servers, and moving them to an offering where it's dollars per user per month on a subscription basis, and getting rid of the infrastructure, the hardware, the need to monitor that hardware, set it up, patch it, and keep it current, and having the ease of single sign-on. And the purpose in highlighting that is a number of people are familiar with the current models for ERP deployment, whether that be GP, NAV, SL, AX. There are a lot of components in terms of the software, the services, and hardware that go along with an on-prem installation. And so the SaaS offering of Dynamics 365 allows NAV to be deployed in a way that is independent of the hardware services in the background, and those headaches associated with managing that have gone away. Next question I'd like to ask the panel, and
Andrew,
yes.
if I could add a little bit of observation to what you just said. Having been of my GP life, 17 years was spent in New York City, and I've been in and out of a lot of businesses. And one of the things that I've noticed, as we all have, one of the things that I notice is that when I walked into a business where the principals were younger, meaning, they kind of grew up with technology as a whole, one of the things I noticed in their businesses was that sometimes they did not even have a domain network. They just did a work group so they could share printers. And everything that they used was cloud-based. And so I see, as some of there are some people who been around as long as those of us on the panel, and without even getting your numbers and Rick's numbers, we got up over 90 years between the other four of us. But with exceptions like us, as more and more people retire, I see more businesses falling into that model. And so I think that's pretty interesting that a lot of them are dropping the whole domain and the whole network and just moving on into a work group environment where all of their software typically is web-based. So typically that means a SaaS model. I just always found that interesting as I walked into businesses when all the principals were in their early 30s or younger, that 9 out of 10 times was the fact. And it got me thinking about businesses as a whole. I also split my time in Charleston, South Carolina. And so as I'm looking around at small businesses here, and I'm seeing the businesses that typically probably run on QuickBooks, and that is one of the big markets that Dynamics 365 wants to be able to capture. And as I think about those businesses, I started wondering, those people, are they getting, I think they're getting QuickBooks because someone that they trust is telling them to get QuickBooks. So I have no real thing. I just wanted to share some of the observations and some of the things that are going on in my head. And the comment you just made started me thinking about that. But I'm curious about some of the other panel. How do we move in to that trusted environment where, like a lot of the people in our community who are going on QuickBooks just because somebody has recommended that, how do we encourage them to go the SaaS route instead of that on-prem QuickBooks route? I think I had a question in there.
Can I take over here? Because what we see now is, what I see here in Denmark is that all the companies I meet, they have the same initial statement when we start out implementing a new system, that being C5 or GP or NAV or whatever, and that is that they want it to be standard, and it's. I usually say that we split the initial meeting up in two. The first part is where they tell us how special they are, and then after we tell them the price for that, then they tell how much they actually look like everybody else after that. And we see that the intentions are there. People want to be standard and want to be able to work with the standard system. However, it is really, really difficult when we get down to the practical side to keep it standard, because they also want a lot of their special processes being supported in the system, and so it's always this fight. So until we actually get to the point where people will use the system like the Office 365, that is, they sign up for a subscription and then they just use the standard. Until we reach that, I think it will be a little bit difficult in the beginning, but I think we're getting there. I mean, people don't buy a Word and then think that they can have that altered to do all sorts of other stuff. It was just some observations from my side.
Yeah, that reminds me of the version of GP that is out today. Back when they first introduced it, because they started with a DOS product, their marketing slogan was "mass marketing to a target audience of one," and that sounds like what you're saying. So I think that's pretty interesting.
All right, so what I'd like to do is to put forth another couple of questions related to Dynamics 365. We have one other question related to CSP, which I would like to take is, when you're a CSP, can you sell on-premise nav? The answer is yes. However, it's governed by a different agreement, and you would need to sign your solution provider agreement with Microsoft as well and meet the requirements of becoming a Microsoft business partner. So the requirements for the two programs are different, but that is an option. And the next question is the twofold. One is, how do we make money from Dynamics 365? And related is, how should an ISV start on Dynamics 365 if they have an add-on module, perhaps for manufacturing? Who would like to start with that? James?
Well, I think the question, how do you make money from Dynamics 365, is occupying a lot of time in most Dynamics partners right now. You look at the models that we've had previously with on-premise license sales and the time and effort, the pre-sales time and effort particularly that goes in. We had a situation over here where we closed one particular contract with a customer just before Christmas, which we've been working on for 6 years, and it finally went over the line. And the time and effort that goes into that really has been financed by the margin on that on-premise license. With a subscription model, that's much more difficult, and I think what we're finding is that, okay, with Dynamics 365, from what I hear, there are still a lot of questions from prospective users about, can it do this? What's the best way of it doing that? What are the possibilities? And would this really fit my business? Which all of us on the panel, I'm sure, are very used to answering those type of questions. But the question is, in a situation where it costs what it costs, how's that going to get paid for in the relative short term rather than a multi-year payback? So I think there's two alternatives to make money for me out of Dynamics 365. One is volume, and if you have the ability to sign up probably thousands of users, then you'll do all right out of it, and the monthly recurrent revenue will be very nice. Otherwise, then you're really into either consulting around it, and I still think there's going to be a big market for people providing expertise around Dynamics 365. It's still, at the end of the day, a very capable product, particularly as Microsoft put more and more of the NAV functionality across the fence into Dynamics 365. There's going to be a lot of people who need to be shown how to use it. They're not going to figure it all out for themselves. And the final one is IP. So the AppSource marketplace is a great innovation for me. It's the first time Microsoft will take my IP and sell it for me worldwide. Previously running an ISP was a very expensive experience for setting up the sales and marketing operation that you needed to get the coverage, and you had to go through partners, which could be quite a difficult experience at times to get them to promote your product to their user base. Now Microsoft will do it direct to the end user. It's when you get through the criteria of getting into AppSource, that's quite straightforward to happen, and you can, providing you have a good good idea, you can sit back and reap the rewards. So I think it's a big sea change for me in the way that businesses in our sector have been run historically. I think we've got to get ready for this, because the economics of it mean that I think most customers, if they can use Dynamics 365, will want to, rather than perhaps buying a Dynamics NAV on-premise license, or GP, or any other product for that matter. It's going to have to be a fair difference for them to accept the extra cost.
All right, thank you very much. Provided with a little bit of background about some of the opportunities and challenges. Certainly there are opportunities now that didn't exist, such as AppSource, that allow you to get your ISV or intellectual property into a marketplace that can be used by other users, and as well from a business perspective, there is the opportunity for consulting, guidance, and training of people using the system and how they get the most out of their investment. One of the other questions, and it ties back into our discussion around Office 365, and that is selling Dynamics 365 Financials seems to work in harmony with Office 365. The answer to that is absolutely it does. But from a CSP reseller perspective, is it, do you think it's going to be Office 365 partners that are out selling Dynamics 365 Financials, or do you think that customers are going to be looking for people that actually have expertise in the Dynamics 365 financial area, and perhaps deal with two different partners, one for the Office 365 product and one for Dynamics 365 Financials? I'd like to put that out to the panel.
Can I take that up?
Yes, go ahead, Pike.
Right. Selling an Office 365 and selling a financial system, which Dynamics 365 is, are two totally different situations. The problem is that selling an Office 365, that means that you should be able to just actually just sell the package for the users, whereas when you have the Dynamics 365, you need to know something about business processes, you need to know something about finance, audits, and all that part. And traditionally, that kind of knowledge is not available at a normal software vendor. So I think that we'll see that we have probably more like the old Dynamics partners are going to extend to also sell the Office 365, or might even merge together, so that they will be able to utilize both systems in one. Because if a customer wants to buy a Dynamics 365 and Office 365, I think they will be reluctant to take two different partners to do that. I think they will try to find one that is able to cover both sides of it. But I think that it needs very, very specialized knowledge about companies and about cultures and stuff like that. So that's how I see it from here.
I think it also depends on the size of the organization who's buying it. If I look at my own organization, I implemented Office 365 myself just by taking the subscription and setting up some email addresses. I mean, NAV Skills is not that big, it's just Luke and me running it. We have 2 email addresses and a shared mailbox. And if I look at my own organization, if I look at Dynamics 365, it's simple enough to get started and to do some invoicing, and I don't need that much help. But it's like what James is saying is that Microsoft starts adding more features, and traditional NAV customers or GP customers are going to switch to 365. Then the requirements, the functional requirements, are going to be equally complex as they are today, especially when Microsoft will release the new designer, which allows customers to actually customize Dynamics 365. You will run into the same issues with NAV as you have the a cloud ERP that you can start customizing. So then the business model of consulting and developing will be the same in the cloud as it is today on-prem. So I think there will be a split between two types of customers, the small customers and the big customers. And the small customers will also follow their accountant. I think a big challenge for Microsoft is to finally convince these accountants to put this in their system, to convince accountants that Dynamics 365 is a really nice application that allows accountants to do the back office accounting, and that allows the small entrepreneur to create sales invoices while their accountant is looking at their back. So I think it depends on the business model and on the user who's buying it.
And Mark, that goes right back to where I was talking about that trusted source. Totally agree, and I think you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, that's probably the easiest way. If an accountant told some of these small local businesses, "Hey, you need to get this product," then that's what they're going to get. Then rather than something they install locally, I think that's just something that's going to happen. And another thing, the Dynamics communities, NAVUG, GPUG, AXUG, CRMUG, SLUG. They're adding in a 365 UG. And one of the things over the years I noticed is the more educated a customer or user is, the more consulting services I have with them, because they're engaging me in projects that increase the ROI on their system, and they're gaining real value from their system. I mean, don't you notice that as well? And they're more fun to work with.
So I agree completely with what Belinda just said. I think there's two aspects to that. First of all, I mean, why, coming back to Belinda's original question, which is why people recommend QuickBooks in the US, it's Sage here in the UK, it's wherever there tends to be a local hero. And I think they come back to what they know. So the accountant knows QuickBooks in the US, they know what it's capable of, they can suggest it, and until they know Dynamics 365 financials and they've got confidence in it the same way, will they recommend it, and how does that, how do we conquer that process? So I think there's a big education job to do with the professional communities, particularly accountants, as well as everybody else that Microsoft have really got to get on top of. I think absolutely echo what, the value as well, I think here, coming back to the question around, Exchange servers, actually, you're charging a client an amount of money for your services, and it's the end result that the client values. And if you're spending time setting up integrations that mean they have to do less processing or wherever, rather than simply installing servers and setting up services and keeping them running, actually the outcome for your client is much, much better. So I don't think that the client's got a certain amount of money that they can afford to spend on their system per year. If they get more bang for their buck, as we term it, I think that they'll be much happier and they'll come back to you the following year and spend the same amount of money again, rather than just doing the basics of, quote unquote, keeping the thing running.
Isn't it also a question about availability? I mean, if you're a small entrepreneur, you just started your company and you're sitting all of a sudden Sunday night needing to make an invoice and find out that Excel might not be the best way to keep track of the books, then you need to go on the internet and then find the best way to actually get a new system up and running, and how to get it up and running and fast. So I mean, it's a question of whether it's available and if it's easy to work with. And now we only saw a glimpse of the Dynamics 365, but there are actually a lot of really interesting functionality in the Dynamics 365, and it's a lot easier to create stuff like customers and new items, and to work with the data altogether, as we've seen with the edit in Excel. So I think it's a question of availability, but people need to know that it's there, and I think that it's not helping that we haven't got a release date at the moment, because in Denmark we have economics that is actually trying to take all the small customers. So it'll be interesting to see.
Can I ask the panel a question? I mean, do you guys see the Power Apps as being something that end users would try to do customization with Dynamics 365? Is that a tool they would want to try to use?
Well, I had one user at one of my customers try it, and they actually got quite far with it, trying to build an app that they could use with their users. So absolutely, especially if you have young IT guys that are used to work with apps and have creative solutions, then I think they will see the logo icon in their Dynamics. They will go to YouTube and get some inspiration there and get running.
We've seen some good results with Flow as well. I think that's the other one that for us has actually been more popular than Power Apps. Once you have a connection to Flow, which isn't as easy as it should be to set up, actually what that allows you to do, and that takes a lot of requests for customization out of NAV, and I'm sure it will be the same for Dynamics 365. Good tool.
One of the questions that came up is comparing and contrasting NAV 2017 and Dynamics 365 from a functional perspective. You know, where does one sit versus the other in terms of features and functions, and then ultimately that translates to opportunities. Who would like to take that to start off? James?
Okay, so I mean, you know, you almost have to check which updates, because Microsoft are slowly filling out Dynamics 365. So currently, you know, you have the core finance functions are all pretty much there. You have the supply chain, so order processing, a limited number of inventory functions, some of which don't, I have to say, make complete sense that they've included some and not others. But I think this is a changing situation, and I don't know when the last update was published to Dynamics 365. I kind of lost track over probably the last 6 weeks or so, but every time, every few weeks, Microsoft are pushing the boundaries a bit further and a bit further. And you know, I don't think that there will be many boundaries between Dynamics Nav and, if any, and what there will be will probably be around security for the platform. So what they're not going to be able to completely do with Dynamics 365 is just give you the ability to access some of the file operations, etc., that you perhaps had with Dynamics Nav. So some of that is being shut down just to protect the platform in a multi-tenanted, complete SaaS environment. But it's a moving scenario, I don't make too many bold statements about what does work and doesn't work, because I've learnt that you actually need to go check each one.
Yeah, and to the NAV audience, which is listening or watching the recording afterwards, the most straightforward way to find out which parts of NAV are in 365 as well is to go and look at application area property. The application area property is a new property which is introduced in 17. And if you're technical, you can go into the properties of an object and see if a certain field or table is part of an application area. Being the nerd I am, what I actually did yesterday, as I spent several hours, Microsoft released the new update for the development environment. And it's actually a neat trick because the development environment is actually the CTP of NAV 2018. And an update for the development environment is also CTP2 for NAV 2018. So I actually looked into the objects, and I found that Microsoft added an application area called location. So I'm a little bit more bold than James. I would actually expect locations to appear pretty quickly in 365 now.
So we're down to the last 4 minutes of our discussion, and what I'd like to do is to wrap up with one more question. And the question is around the profitability P&L. If you look at a traditional partner, heavily weighted on software sales margins, that makes up a significant component of people's overall P&L. Moving forward, that is changing with the margins. So who would like to comment on sort of that transformation or a different approach perhaps that a partner will need to take moving forward to generate the margins that they're looking for?
I'll take that. I think it's actually two different types of partners we're talking about here, or at least it's two different departments at the partner, because the traditional consultant will be the one going to the customer and doing the analysis and doing all the education and so on. Whereas as I see it, the Dynamics 365 is more like a package solution. That is the hosting environment. We're going to just make the product available to the customer, and then maybe sell some packaged education. But as I see it, it's two different types of partners, or at least different types of consultants.
I'd pick that up and say that I think it's going to be more transparent in the future. I think in a traditional partner, you have the full service, as we've kind of tagged it, where a lot is bundled into the kind of annual support contracts and different ways of getting the ways you've charged the customer. I think going forward, we're going to be more like a professional services model that you've seen in perhaps legal or accounting, where when we start to work on a particular client, we're going to have to turn the clock on and charge for our time in a much more accurate basis, rather than just knowing that could be subsidized by the license sales or the maintenance sales or wherever. So I think actually it's probably it's our industry maturing after 30, 40 years. I think other professions have gone through this kind of cycle, but a very long time ago, and it's just us reaching the point. But I think there will still be the need for all the services. Clients are not going to want any less capability from their systems, and they're still going to have the integration requirements. They're still going to have the change that they're all faced with, and that's probably going to get even more, and they're going to want to do that on Dynamics 365. So I don't think the need for us is going away, even in a packaged solution world. We're perhaps going to have to think about what we're doing and not waste time on the basics of the platform or the provisioning, but real look at what the business needs and focus on making sure that they're capable of understanding that and using it.
Okay, I'd like to wrap up with one final comment and thank our panel. One thing I do want to highlight, there's a lot to be learned. There is a lot to determine from a partner perspective. Once you've looked at Dynamics 365, one of the things to think about is how do you stand out from the crowd? So the partner association with Dynamics Communities is Dynamics Pro, and they will be offering certification exams for Dynamics 365 financials in the first quarter of this year, and in conjunction with that there will be training opportunities as well. So there will be some community-based certifications and third-party certifications for Dynamics 365 financials. I'd encourage you to have a look and get some more information on that. I'd like to thank our panelists today, and just want to make sure that everyone recognizes that Mark, Belinda, Pike, and James have contributed a lot of their background and experience. It's an interesting environment with Dynamics 365 financials. It's a different environment, and I'm going to take the liberty of summing up and saying I believe there's a lot of opportunity with Dynamics 365 financials, but it is a significant paradigm shift from traditional Microsoft ERP solutions and on-premise installations. Thank you very much. If you want, there will be a copy of this recording made available shortly after the session is complete today.
Thank you, Andrew.
This will complete our webinar.